All right, I did. Host, I've asked you to start your video.
So just the way the agenda has worked during lunch, we're gonna go on Zoom, and we're gonna get the NCTR Survival Circle with Eugene Arcan. He comes from the Muskeg Lake First Nation, and this virtual will be about 20 minutes. So we're just going to hook onto it, and I think he's already on. And then afterwards, we'll get into Raymond Frogner, but we'll introduce him too also. Okay, thanks.
All right. Hello? Hello? Test? 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 Okay. Nigan? Okay, thank you. Nigan nas kumaga mamo tapits eto mga kyo pito taifwa. Ewa nas kumami naga kyo ma kage soswaga ni snamaga waskaika na gakyo etam skatagok. So I thank the Creator for bringing us all together and for bringing me here today, along with my fellow survivors who are in the room. I want to acknowledge all of you, and I want to acknowledge all those that put this event together, along with the descendants of those that are considered missing in unmarked graves. It's certainly an honor for me to be involved with this event from the north. I know we had a pretty rough morning. I'm sure all of us who were in these institutions that they attempt to call schools were very triggered, and so apparent that we need one another for support throughout this whole process that in my mind I feel somewhat abandoned, the same as the NAC committee feel right now by this federal government and the complacency that has set in once again. Nevertheless, we'll carry on. It's our duty. We have inherited it. I want to acknowledge the presence there of Terry Brown, who was a founding member of the governing circle of the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation. And as a staff member, I want to acknowledge our director, present director, Stephanie Scott, who was there from day one. Also acknowledge Raymond, who was there from about day 10 in this whole process. Without wasting too much time regarding prior to the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I'm going to go right to that day. That day in Ottawa, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released their calls to action in their final report, a few minutes after the event was over, we came to realize that basically our National Center of Truth and Reconciliation, that was put under the calls to action as a National Research Center. But that domain was so full, had pages and pages of the federal government's National Research Center depositories, that we decided to change the name to the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation. But that day we found we were homeless. We were aware and are aware that there was a bid process for which post-secondary education institution would host the National Center. And Somehow, in all of this process, we were not a part of it as survivors, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission commissioners were, and the University of Manitoba won the bid. I'm from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan, and I know that we were very disappointed at that point in time that the First Nations University of Canada didn't make, uh, wasn't chosen. And I know it's the same for all of you from across the nation who have some allegiance or relationship with post-secondary education institutions across the land who made a bid for the center. In that transition from being homeless, we were made aware that the University of Manitoba had set aside what is known as Chancellor's Hall for the National Center, which was where, I guess in previous years, it explains itself that the Chancellor of the University of Manitoba resided there. It is presently our temporary home. At that time, we were also informed in no uncertain terms that the place was haunted. Um, we had to correct them and educate them that it is a colonial term, that Chancellor's Hall was spiritually occupied, and that we would deal with it as we have in so many past instances within our own communities, within our own families, and within our own homes. That the spirits are not there to hurt us. The spirits are to be coexisted with. And so we began that journey of that temporary home. Before we had a chance to move in, however, being homeless, we had no place to store the bentwood box and the artifacts that went along with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, including the eagle staff, the talking stick and the walking stick, and also the gifts that had been presented to us through the Gestures of Reconciliation process at all the national events and regional events. It took us a while after we moved into the center to be able to repatriate our bentwood box and all of the other items I mentioned a bit ago. But I'm still thankful to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights for stepping up and housing those artifacts for approximately a year or so. But it became also very evident that these artifacts had grown on them. And repatriation was a bit of a struggle, but in the end we got it done through traditional ceremony and repatriated our goods back to the center. It's important for everyone to understand that the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation didn't just pop up and it was established. As Terry and Stephanie know, it was difficult. And it's difficult because there's no template for what the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did. There's no template for what we're doing today with the National Advisory Committee on Missing Children and Unmarked Graves. Same as there was no template to set up a National Center of Truth and Reconciliation based on colonial standards of archival work that has to be done. And so we began a journey. I happened to be the chair for the first 6 years. Under the director was Rai Moran. And we attempted to establish a national center as best we could that would be autonomous. We had a fair struggle with the University of Manitoba, who at that time, under their president and their chancellor, attempted to put the National Center as one of the University of Manitoba's institutions. And we fought hard and let them know that no, we do not belong to you. We will not ever belong to you. And that we're autonomous and we have a relationship with the University of Manitoba. Subsequent to that, there's been a new president and a new chancellor, and our working relationship is a lot more positive today than it was for those first number of years. And it's important I share that with you because people like myself, Terry Brown, and the original members of the governing circle were all residential school survivors. And this center is your center. This center doesn't belong to University of Manitoba. This is an Indian Residential School Survivors National Center. It's given us, let me put it in our way of thinking, it's given us an opportunity to be grandparents again. This year is the 10th anniversary of the National Center. Our grandchild is 10 years old, and it hasn't been treated that well by many of our own. And without being too negative, it's important that I'm truthful to you. And in recent years, I have seen our own people working on the same issue that we're all working on and you're all working on, make it look like the National Center was the enemy. That's not correct. Uh, I don't know if it's because of ill feelings from the bid process that happened or what the real reason is, but sometimes it's important for everyone to take a step back and realize we're all in this together. We're not in a colonial competition here. We're all trying to get the same job done. And if you happen to be one of those groups or one of those people that are treating the National Center as if we're alien to what we're doing, it's I want to say it's not right. This is your center. Treat this grandchild with the respect that it deserves. I want to move on now into the trials and tribulations that we had. Of course, I mentioned that we had a hat in hand relationship with the University of Manitoba. There was no template in place, and we were always searching to try and find the funds to do the work that was required, both in the archives and trying to maintain a national center and get a profile of some kind across the nation. It was difficult with limited funds. It was also difficult because an instrument of the Indian Residential School settlement agreement was the IAP Secretariat under the chairmanship of Peter Grant and Kathleen Mahoney, among others. And in this process, when we began our work, specifically Raymond and Jesse Boyd too began their work archiving our stuff. All of a sudden, there was a brainwave or something happened to Peter Grant, and he started challenging the privacy of what we were acquiring from both Indian Residential Schools Canada, the churches, and others, which wasn't a lot at that time, but it was still being challenged that we didn't have adequate privacy in place, to the point of several summer students being hired to try and infiltrate the process. It never was infiltrated, but in that process, we were hauled off to the Supreme Court. The National Center was by Indian Residential Schools Canada and the IAP Secretariat. And I'm not talking any court, I'm talking the Supreme Court, where it was our ability to maintain privacy to the highest level was being challenged. Somehow, in the end, they won the case. And it's come to me now that the reason they challenged the National Center was it was not about privacy. In the end, it was about the erasing of history and trying to say that these things didn't happen, all the time calling us liars and that we were making up stories, same as we heard when we were watching that video today. On September 19th, 2027, any one of us that went through the IAP process, if we don't sign this document, which is under the control of Indian Residential Schools Canada, who disallowed the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation to maintain a communications campaign to all residential school survivors, automatically, two things. If we pass away today, our records can be destroyed tomorrow. If we're still alive in 2027, September 19th, our records will be destroyed. And that's what that Supreme Court case was all about. And I say that because a document was found on the late or the then minister Carolyn Bennett's desk because the public relations process being circulated by Indian Residential Schools Canada, including the IAP Secretariat, was everyone was talking about student on student abuse. While on her very desk, she had called for an investigation into those uh, to that statement. And on her very desk was a document that verified that 65% of all physical, sexual, psychological, and sexual abuse was committed by the clergy, and that 35% of it was student on student abuse. Another piece of evidence that showed its face later, that the stereotype of the students being the perverts and the deviants that were causing the dysfunctions that we experience today intergenerationally was by our people. And it wasn't. We were simply innocent children who experienced, I guess, an odd way of growing up into adolescence. But it was the clergy and the supervisors and deviants that worked in those institutions that were responsible for that abuse. And in no uncertain terms, let the minister know that if we hear any more of this garbage, that we would be exposing the numbers that were found, and we never heard about it again. It was a difficult time to go through that process, but it was necessary. I'm forever grateful that the Creator sent us people like Raymond Frogner, who came to us from the West Coast. We thought he was a settler, archivist, only to find out he's also somebody who was picked up in his 60s scoop and he's a Treaty First Nation from Northern Alberta, who took a serious drop in pay to come and be a part of the National Centre of Truth and Reconciliation to have it be what it is today. For those first 6 years, we struggled mightily. I've used the term hat in hand. It really was that. We didn't know sometimes if we were going to be able to make payroll. It was always scrambling. All the time trying to share the truths of what was necessary to make the centre run, but also the true history of Canada's darkest secret. And so all of a sudden, 215 happened. The Kamloops. The 215 that woke up the world, woke us all up. All of a sudden, we were validated. We were no longer told that we were making up stories. And shortly after, Cowes First Nation and the Maryvale Residential School were exposed to another huge number. And then it went across the nation. But that was a turning point. It was a turning point that made everyone, including the Pope, come alive again after complacency had set in prior to the 215. The habitual calling of residential school survivors liars and story makers stopped, although it is resurfacing again. And it bothers the hell out of me that people who are trying to erase history or deny the true history of this country makes me wonder if they have something to hide in their own families. Did their descendants work in these institutions? Were these ancestors of theirs some of the people who helped destroy our people across the land in every residential school in this country? Why are they doing this? Why are you being so hurtful? I want you all to know, if you fall into that category and you happen to be watching or listening to this, to know that we hold nothing against you. It was a different era and we recognize that. However, it's important to understand that what happened was for real. And if you're going to deny and try and erase history, maybe do it for proper reasons rather than just being a racist or a redneck. You think we want to be in the situations we're in socially? I think not. But like I said, thanks to the 215 and to all those others that moved things forward, we began the process of what we're doing now. It's important to understand that the uh, the National Center belongs to each residential school survivor. And eventually it's going to belong to the child of every residential school survivor and the grandchildren of every residential school survivor. This corporate history has to be corrected for all of us to know that we're all allies. It's important to know also that the records we have recovered from the churches, from the federal government, and from institutions, they still we still share ownership of those documents with some of those groups, and that we have copies of them. But it appalls me. It appalls me to find out in a residential school survivor circle meeting that Indian Residential Schools Canada and Library and Archives Canada have put a pause on getting the rest of these documents into our possession. It makes me so suspicious that again something is being hidden. It makes me so suspicious that who is putting a stop to this. This commitment was made by prime ministers, by deputy ministers to get us all of the records. That isn't what's going on today. And as Raymond will share with you, and he's very kind in saying that Library and Archives Canada have paused. Who pauses? While we're experiencing what we experienced this morning on reliving the experiences that we endured, and somebody is telling us, I'm going to take a pause, we're old. We don't have that many days. We all have more yesterdays than tomorrows. And somebody is trying to tell us we're going to pause. That has to stop. This National Center is celebrating its 10th year, your grandchild. And I want so much to have my fellow residential school survivors, our leadership, and anyone involved in archival research and research to understand this is your center. It will always be your center. It is our center. I'm also at that age, like many of you, who also understand, and I'm going a little bit over here, Raymond, please bear with me. Um, I also realize that this opportunity I have today, presented by the Creator, doesn't present itself to me very often to talk to fellow survivors from across the land. This morning, we watched that video, and it talked about shame. You know, I carried that shame also. I'm 72 years old. I carried it for 50 years of my life, and I didn't understand it. But now I've come to understand something known as blameless shame. And I want to share it with all the residential school survivors who are in that room and those that are watching online. Blameless shame is when you understand that you did nothing wrong. You were simply a child who was being sexually, physically, psychologically, and emotionally assaulted by a system that was meant to destroy us. Blameless shame is very important, very, very important then, and it's very important for us today to shed that garbage that we've been carrying around and trying to hide and not understanding we had nothing to hide. And I welcome this opportunity to share and encourage all my fellow residential school survivors to embrace and learn more about blameless shame. Many have not got there yet. The last thing I want to clarify is this buzzword called reconciliation. For me, it's simply a buzzword. It's a buzzword for many non-government organizations who are applying for funding to tokenize and paternalize their version of what makes them feel good through words without any actions. I'm getting sick and tired of it. There can be no reconciliation without truth. Anytime you say reconciliation, you also include the word truth. When truth is included, maybe we will get to witness some type of reconciliation. At this point in time, I don't see it. Simply, why would Eugene say that? Why would 781 say that? Well, I've thought about this long and hard many times. It's made me cry many times. It's brought that little boy in me out many times. Because I look at it this way: what are we reconciling? What did we do wrong? We were simply innocent little children that got picked up and they took us away. They ruined us. They ruined our families. They ruined our communities, and they made us dependent on another society that hasn't, in my mind, met the standards of what humanity should be on our own lands, with our own languages, with our own customs, and our own ceremonies. With that, I thank you very much, Trina and all the staff. I want to thank Stephanie for attempting to do the best she could to assist the National Advisory Committee. I'm aware of what's happened and what's transpired in regards to the cutting of funding. I'm very hurt and disappointed, the same as all you are. But I want to say to each and every one of you that you have added to your legacies in a good way. I witnessed what's happened at past events and what happened this morning. And I want to take some time to applaud each and every one of you for the work that you have done. We only have a few months to go with the National Advisory Committee, but I'll tell you, in my mind, you will not be forgotten. And the minister who is in place and the deputy minister who's in place right now, who had any type of role to play in the cutting of funding of this, have to be reminded that they all have a legacy. And this sad legacy is going to be a part of their history. And they have a few months to reconsider. With that, naskum na wakio. Hi, hi. Thank you.
Let's give a big hand to Eugene Arcand from the Muskeg Lake First Nations. So we're a little behind time, so I'm just going to get, Eugene mentioned Raymond a couple of times, so we're just going to get Raymond to introduce himself and just do the talk on who we are.
I'll just start. Oh, there we go. Tansei, Raymond, Netigason, Notari, Oscar, Egua, Nigari, Doris, Netatoscan, National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Bonjour, je m'appelle Raymond, je suis le directeur de recherche et le directeur des archives pour le Centre national pour la vérité et la réconciliation. Hello, my name is Raymond. I'm the head of research and the head of archives for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Following Eugene is kind of like following Wayne Gretzky or something, but I want to first say thank you to Eugene, and I hope everybody realizes just what a champion and a shining light he's been for survivors for a very long time. So he definitely should be appreciated and cherished. Maybe I will start. He mentioned a bit about me, so just a bit of background then. My mom was sent to Shaftesbury Mission in northern Alberta as a young girl and was expelled when she had a child at the age of 16 whom she left with her aunt and became a teenage runaway, took the Dunvegan train to south to Edmonton, where she met my dad, and they moved to the West Coast in 1949, and she kept that a secret for her entire life. My sisters and I never knew anything about that until my half-brother found me when I was in my 30s and discovered that I actually had relatives in Duncan's Reserve in northern Alberta, whom I've visited. They once presented me with an eagle feather but I'm always too scared to carry it with me, or else. But it's for my safekeeping, as they tell me. To move on, then, I'll talk today about the NCTR archives and the NCTR in general, who we are, the records we have, and our most important project, the Missing Children Research Project. So, to begin with the archives, a couple words about the TRC. It's important to recognize the mandate of the TRC because this is the origins of the NCTR. It was not a judicial commission. It didn't have the power of subpoena. It couldn't take a person to court before a tribunal. The goal of the commission was to document the lived experiences of survivors at residential schools. It was thought of.
Reach is not available.
It was thought of as a victim-centered, truth-centered research endeavor. It did have, through the Supreme Court, the power to force other offices, including the church groups that signed on to the residential school agreement, to turn over records that were related to the history and legacy of the residential school system, but they were not allowed, or they didn't have the power to press charges against perpetrators of crimes. So secondly, moving on from that, in 2015, as Eugenia mentioned, we established the NCTR as a repository to hold all the work that the TRC had done. Now, it's vitally important to remember that there was a transfer from the federal government because the TRC was a federal government commission. So it worked with federal government privacy law. And in that transfer, which was done through a document called the trust deed that transferred all the records into the possession of the University of Manitoba, which was going to house the NCTR, and the NCTR was going to operate arm's length from that university. There was a point in time when there was no protection whatsoever for those records. So all of the crimes, all of the personal information that was highly sensitive and potentially harmful was wide open. So the NCTR Act was drafted to literally place the NCTR under Manitoba's Freedom of Information legislation. That otherwise, because it was no longer under the privacy laws of the federal government, those records would have been wide open for anyone just to splash on Facebook and cause more trauma and more harm. So that is the main reason to the protection of the stories of survivors. That is the main reason why it was placed under FIPA. A lot of people now question that, is the government hiding behind FIPA? And maybe they're trying to, but the original purpose was to protect the stories of the survivors from being made wide open in the public. So moving on from that, so that was the setup of the NCTR. And it should be noted that in addition to that trust deed to transfer the records and the NCTR Act to address the privacy, we also had the Administrative Act, which set up a Circle of Survivors, which Eugene, for example, was on. It's a set of 7 survivors representing genders and regions across the country, and they advise us on our policies, our procedures, and our activities. We also have a governing circle of all the signatories represented from the URSA, and we also have 2 spiritual guides that give us at least weekly talks and help us with our health support as we work with these difficult records. As I've covered this, I know my time is going to be short, so I'm going to try and keep this moving on quickly. I have mentioned the origins of the TRC, and then in Schedule N, the mandate of the NCTR to have to acknowledge the residential school experience, to provide a holistic and safe space for survivors to engage, to identify sources and create as complete as possible a resource base for the history and legacy of the residential school experience. And that, in fact, is problematic because that's the only statement in the URSA giving us guidance when we're talking about the records, to create as complete as possible a history and legacy. So when we go out to church groups, when we go to the government, we've several times been told, or the TRC was several times been told as well, that this wasn't in this definition of as complete as possible. These records are outside of that scope. So we've had to fight tooth and nail over and over again to acquire records that we thought were quite obviously about the history and legacy of the schools. And we've had received considerable pushback repeatedly on that issue. But fundamentally, the core pillars of the NCTR then are the archives themselves, which guarantee that this resource is not lost. Future generations can refer to this, and it will remain trustworthy, reliable, and authentic. So they won't be lost. And this is one of the main issues that we want to make sure is clear. Although these are digital copies, we've spent the last 4 years and over $6 million creating a digital architecture to ensure that we have a preservation procedure for all of the digital records. And at this time, I can say with confidence that we have 3 full copies of all of our digital records in different geographic locations so that they cannot be lost. These records and this memory is going nowhere. It will be accessible for future generations. We're also continuing with the research that the TRC did. We're still gathering statements. We're still acquiring records, which I'll discuss in a minute. So the research is ongoing. We're also doing additional work in terms of research. For example, we're currently working on what we're calling the Legacies Project, which is studying intergenerational trauma, finding records of trauma in our schools, in our school records, and then investigating the family legacies that occurred, so that we have a documented evidence of what people have always talked about, that legacy of intergenerational trauma. It's there, we want to prove it, beyond a shadow of a doubt, which we already know, but as we're also aware, deniers still come at us for this. And finally, we have a very strong educational role. We would like to see the provincial governments of every province use our records, teach these stories in their classrooms from K to 12, make sure that children grow up knowing that in Turtle Island, this is a fundamental component of the history of this country. It's Indigenous, and it should be recognized in the schools. So that is the NCTR's mandate. As I said, I know I'm pressed for time, so I won't go too far into how we operate. But this is an example of what we do hold now. Our archival holdings are 3.2 million. And in addition to that, we have almost 900,000 that we're still processing. And of that, we've produced or placed only a sample on our site. So of the 139 schools, we placed a sample of each school records on the site. So know that when you go to our site and you see those records, that's just 5% of what we have for that school. Contact us and we can ensure that you get access to the rest. The website doesn't permit us to put everything online. As you can see, the size is enormous. And for that reason, it's not everything. But you should know that there's private as well as public records, church groups, public offices, all comprise that 3.2 million, almost over 4 million as it's getting processed. So this is just an example of all the record sets we hold. We hold over about 150 different record sets, public and private, by groups. We call them series, sometimes aggregations, but simply by groups is enough. This is just one of the many spreadsheets that lists off all the different record sets that we hold. For church records, they come from 71 different locations or sites where they were held. As I'll say in a moment, they were very dispersed, but this amounts to almost 250,000 records from church groups across the country, and we are actively working to acquire more, which I'll discuss again in a minute. But this map just shows you some of the repositories locations for this almost 250,000 records from 71 different sources. Government records is 74 different sources of records, or sites, as we refer to them, which comprises over 3 million records. Library Archives Canada and several federal government repositories across the country are the main sources. But I'd also like to point out that we're still working to get the reports of the coroners of every province. We don't have every coroner's records. Vital stats, we finally negotiated an agreement with Manitoba, but we still have a couple provinces that haven't produced, Quebec notably, the vital stats records. And then TRC events, we hold over, the TRC visited over 200 communities during their investigations, where they held sharing circles and sharing panels where survivors and intergenerational survivors could talk about the legacies of the schools. So of those 200 events, we have over 7,000 statements that we have fully preserved. And just to be safe, we did a project with the National Film Board, who are experts in film preservation, And for the last 2 years or more, actually, almost 3, we've been working on a preservation program that will ensure that all 7,000 of these statements will be in a preservation format in the long-term future, and as I said, in multiple copies, so that there's no fear of them ever being lost. And again, I won't go too much into detail because I'm time pressed. In addition to the And these are the sorts of things that capture that, that hold it and share it. So that's why we want a space with a proper gallery where we can actually show these gifts that were given to us from communities. So, as I mentioned previously, there are gaps in these records, considerable gaps. Sometimes my analogy is, imagine an explosion that sends out the records in a radius of several kilometers, and then you're left to try and pick them all up, knowing that some are destroyed and missing forever. There's not a single school, for example, that has a complete run of quarterly returns. Quarterly returns, admission files, and discharge records are the most accurate and direct records to identify a student's time at a school, and not a single school has a complete set of any of those records. Sometimes they were destroyed. There was a great set of destruction in the 1940s of over 1 million records, and so there's a tremendous gap there. But there's gaps in other places too. For church records, we still don't have, for example, the sacramental files for the Catholic orders. Sacramental files record births, deaths, and marriages. They would be, again, like vital stats, one of the most fundamental sources for tracing the life of a child at a school. And we still are working with churches to try and locate and pull together sacramental files. So there are gaps, and that's going to be years of work to pull them all together as much as we possibly can. So with that in mind, we have certain incoming collections. As Eugene had mentioned, we're in discussions with CERNAC right now on a document acquisition committee, or DAX as it's called, that will bring us in over 20 million more records from federal government offices across the country. That has been placed on hold. It's not over. It's just we're waiting for proper funding and support to go forward with that project. Another one is the day school records. Library and Archives Canada has again placed that project on hold. We're still unsure of the reasons. We have been in negotiations with them for a couple of years, and it looked like as soon as the day school settlement was done, we would get all the records. Now they've decided that they're not quite ready to transfer them to us. So we still fully expect to get them, but we don't have them yet. The Oblates of OMI Lacombe, we signed an agreement earlier in the year for all of their records, and then in November we signed a formal agreement that would open up all of the personnel files of the Oblates after 2 years after the death of the Oblate priest, which is much more open than any public archive in Canada. Right now, a provincial archive opens the records, private records of a person 50 years after their death. So this is actually more open, but to be frank and honest about it, they would never have opened the records the way they have if it hadn't been for the discoveries in places like Kamloops. It cast a spotlight on the Oblates and forced them to open these records. Other ingestions, the Van de Velde records, one of the most notorious Oblate priests in the north. He escaped charges in Canada, fled back to Belgium, where he gave his records to a university. So we've been in touch with this university. It's called the University of Leuven, and we're in the process of hiring a student to digitize all of those records and bring them all back. Strangely enough, he also decided to donate all the artwork that he had collected in the north over decades. He donated it to University of African Art in Brussels. So we're still in discussions to get that art. So these are some of the examples of large sets of records that we know are there and we are in the process of trying to get. As you can see, including the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls inquiry records, other private sets of records from individual people. And I'll just a couple more words about the oblates, because they're such a significant portion of the schools in the West and the North. One of the other reasons it's so difficult to get these records and to order them is because there's several different layers of authority. There's canon law, there's what they call the provincials, which is a certain order of oblate authority, and then there's the records of the superiors, and then there's the private files of the priests themselves. And all of them are dispersed across different repositories, the main ones being at the BC Archives, in the Provincial Archives of Alberta, the Centre Patrimoine in Winnipeg, and Deschâtelet in Montreal. And in all those places, we currently have students working to make digital copies of records that we don't have. But what I will say, one of the funniest things we found, or curious, is the records of the oblates in Winnipeg at the Centre Patrimoine. Their file lists are different than the file lists in Deschâtelet, although they claim that they sent all the records from Winnipeg to Deschâtelet. In the process, somehow the file lists have changed. So we're still investigating that, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what they did to the records and why they're not all there. But that's ongoing. To access your records, as I've said, we are our primary responsibility is to make these records accessible to survivors. So the NCTR has received 2,327 survivor inquiries since 2017, and since 2021, the center has received 4,906 records in total requests. We have 2 archivists working full-time to respond to this. On average, we get about 40 to 45 new inquiries per month, and our backlog has grown again. This is an example. We've often thought about maybe just posting this as the numbers on a yearly basis of what we've responded to and what we're getting. But as you can see in 2021, let me just see, I'm told there's a pointer here. As you can see in 2021, after discoveries, the inquiries more than doubled. We hired more archivists on a contract basis to handle that backlog, but we weren't able to keep them because of the cost, and since we've had to let them go, the 2 full-time archivists have witnessed a slow increase in our backlog again. But I will say that we still prioritize the survivor inquiries, and if we can, we will be hiring more students or more archivists to pull down that backlog again. And if you are a survivor, there's 2 ways to acquire or ask for these records. One is to send us an email to this number or to this address, or you could use the phone number here provided. I have my own personal cards, and Amber over in the quarter also has access to information for you to help you find your records. If it's a third-party inquiry, that is a relative or a relation, you have to have permission from that survivor to acquire those records, or if a proof of death if that survivor is passed on. Now, one important difference I would like to point out is we also supply proactive release, and we've done over 80,000 proactive releases of records, and this is one of the ways we're trying to get around the FIPA legislation, the privacy law. If you do a proactive release, for example, and you're looking at quarterly returns to find disappeared children, you will get a full unredacted copy of the quarterly return if it's proactive, and that will expedite the work of getting these records, so it's more efficient than other ways. So I'll just run through quickly some of the types of records: over 26,000 photos, over 4,000 quarterly returns, over 1,000 maps and plans, the TRC events records, RCAP, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, educational records, and now finally the MCP3 project. I will say that we've been working on this since 2019. We now have a commemoration site online. We have what they call a death register, which is a response to Call to Action 72, which lists every child in detail that we have discovered that has been lost or disappeared at school. That database is only accessible to the families of that survivor and the survivors themselves, or by special permission from them. We also have a names database, which we're trying to determine a comprehensive list of names of all the children who attended schools across the country. Now, these are the first couple of phases. We went through all of our records, and by the end of phase 2, after support of over $4 million from CERNA, we could say that we've discovered over 17,500 indications of loss that need more research, but suggest that this is the disappearance of a child at a school and should be investigated. We've also got 4,400 undeniable identifications of loss that we have documented, and we're in the process of an engagement program to reach out to communities to discuss what is the best way to share this trusted knowledge respectfully. So going forward, we now want to develop a map that will have locations of unmarked burial sites with permissions of communities. It must be public knowledge. We also will continue with our investigations going forward into loss of that 17,500, which I mentioned. And we have a comprehensive community outward engagement program. So far, we've reached out to 25 communities regarding our research, and this knowledge transferred back to the communities of what we found. But hopefully, going forward, with CERNA's permission, we will continue this research with their support. And that's just an example of a couple of the things we have found during our research. I'll wrap it up with this. This is one of we have a comprehensive list of all the students who attended Cooper Island Residential School. And a couple of the interesting facts we found with that is the Department of Indian Affairs stopped doing reports in 1909 on annual reports on the schools. But what we found is consistently year by year, we found at least twice as many deaths than the annual reports, right up until they stopped publishing them in 1909. That's just one example of one of the many things we found, but we're going school by school to have comprehensive lists of every student who attended and every student who was lost. So stay tuned for that, assuming that we get funded to continue this work. And there's just one other example of our data analytics, the death pattern. There's an interesting 2 different spikes in the data. You'll notice there's a drop-off in this point here, and we've discussed this several times amongst ourselves, and what we all agree is this actually suggests a lack of records, because this is the difference from 1956 to 1957, and there's no other reason that we can think of or find in the history of why that would spike like that from such a depth. It's a lack of records, and again, this is where we have to try and find out where all these records are and get them into our holdings. So I'll wrap up there because I know my time is limited. So thank you, merci, Kiana Skomatin.
Your time is way overdue. No. I learned over many years as emceeing that a speaker will never have eye contact with an MC because they want to keep going, which is all good, because a lot of good information. Our next presenter, I'm going to call upon Harley. He can come up here and he can introduce our next speaker.
Guess I'm a little shorter, so I got to move the mic. So good afternoon. That was a delicious lunch, and certainly much badly needed. So our next speaker, I'll do a little intro of Dr. Clark. So, you know, what we're dealing with a lot of times is each step of this deeply emotional work, we must ensure that we take care of the survivors and ourselves and each other. So Dr. Wayne Clark, who is joining us with a pre-recorded session, and if we have time after, he'll join on for Q&A if there's any questions. So Dr. Wayne Clark is an assistant professor of psychiatry and a director of the Wabanachakos Indigenous Health Program at the University of Alberta. He's a registered Inuk with the roots in Whale Cove Dr. Clark focuses on advancing Indigenous health by integrating Inuit knowledge into clinical and educational settings. He's a leader in circumpolar health, and Dr. Clark sits on the international and national health committees and promotes reconciliation in healthcare. His efforts emphasize community-driven, culturally safe healthcare that fosters meaningful partnerships between academic institutes and Inuit communities. So with that, Dr. Clark.
Hello, I'm Wayne Enudlak Clark, and I am recording this video today from the unceded traditional territories of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples in Maryland, where I am currently at the Johns Hopkins University. And I'm sorry I could not be there in person, but I will be available after this video for Q&A on Zoom. I am presenting today on the topic of intergenerational trauma, specifically how to advance trauma-informed, culturally safe care from an Indigenous lens. A little bit about me. I am originally from Churchill and a registered Inuk of the Nunavut Agreement, and I have family ties to Tikarakchuak. I'm the grandson of Johnny and Frances Voicey, pictured here on the screen, and I'm the son of Grace Voicey Clark. My family moved to Churchill as part of the resettlement that occurred in the 1950s. And the resettlement is traumatizing, as was other Indigenous peoples that were relocated as part of colonization. And specifically, I'll speak to trauma related to the Indian residential school system and the loss of loved ones. My research focuses on Inuit-led health solutions, integrating Inuit knowledge into community-led mental health interventions. And I also work with other colleagues in Indigenous health in health quality system improvement. So in terms of types of trauma, trauma that results from colonization and forced assimilation policies and systemic injustices like residential schools have impacted Indigenous peoples from the time of contact. But more specifically, after the Indian Act and other kinds of colonial instruments and policies like residential schools have exacerbated trauma. And it's passed down through generations, affecting families and communities. The direct response of trauma, such as violence, loss, discrimination, different kinds of racism, have compounded into ongoing traumas that we experience in contemporary. Intergenerational trauma is different than trauma per se, is that it's the cumulative emotional and psychological damage that's passed across generations. And colonization, loss of culture, Indian residential schools, loss of loved ones, forced relocations, these are causes, but there's other causes as well, as systems perpetuate racist policies, like the Indian residential schools. CFS, for example, is another very modern kind of intergenerational trauma that we experience in our communities today. And symptoms from the individual context would include survivor's guilt, depression, disassociation, PTSD, distrust, and victim identity. Studies have shown that Indigenous populations experience PTSD at rates 2 to 3 times higher than non-Indigenous groups. This is a chart that shows the mediators of intergenerational transmission of trauma within families. This is a model that looks at not necessarily indigenous peoples, but how it impacts generations in families. In generation one, the adverse childhood experiences, abuse, neglect, poor parenting, household dysfunction, that can, in a residential school lens, that can be that first generation that attends residential schools, and then that creates an environment for different kinds of responses that include poor appraisals, different cognitive styles that result in coping mechanisms, which then are presented in kinds of symptoms or outcomes that include poor mental health, essentially, but the kinds of behaviors that are part of a poor mental health presentation. This also is challenged in parenting, where the kinds of issues that have been experienced in residential schools are passed on or have been passed on. And what we're seeing is healing in communities to respond to these deficits, to reverse the behavior in the following generations. So the impact of unresolved grief links to historical trauma, such as disconnection from land, language, and traditional practices. When individuals are in residential schools or in group homes or CFS homes, the loss of place and culture is part of unresolved grief, just like the kinds of experiences, the negative experiences that occur in those environments. And the intergenerational transmission refers to trauma that is presented in behaviors and emotional patterns, as well as societal structures that reinforce these behaviors. And the clinical relevance is that these traumas affect mental health and health-seeking behaviors today. There's community-led healing initiatives that include cultural ceremonies, elder guided healing circles, land-based healing, and so forth. And we are finding that these are some of the most effective responses to dealing with trauma. Here is a table that looks at risk factors and protective factors related to trauma. The kinds of risks that are associated with trauma include colonization, as well as intergenerational trauma, the loss of place and culture, like I mentioned in the previous slide, but the disconnectedness of spiritual, emotional, and mental. So the ways in which we were, our ways of being that were taught to us from our ancestors, that disconnection also dissipates over time. So there's less of a connection to the spiritual when you're dealing with grief and trauma. It's been known to be like a secondary or even primary recovery response when we're dealing with recovery from trauma. Racism and discrimination can perpetuate trauma, certainly substance use. Other kinds of comorbidities can be challenging to deal with. So if we have multiple chronic health conditions, in addition to depression, these factors can significantly challenge recovery. Negative parental behaviors also can impact people. But as I mentioned, the loss or disconnection from ancestry or the loss of loved ones from our current lives is also extremely important to consider. And protective factors, so this is the list that we want to be looking at. We want to be cognizant of our identities, improving self-esteem, living on the land. And if you can't live on the land, that you get back to the land as much as possible, that you have resiliency in your family and community, role models, connectedness, a consciousness of historical, and our cultural connections, implementing traditional practices into everyday life, recovery and reconnection, traditional land teachings, land-based programs, and community-driven interventions. There are different models of community-driven interventions that have helped our people heal, whether that's in ceremony in a Cree community or in an Inuit community. The ceremonies are different, but the connection to one another in those contexts not only confronts the trauma, but it embraces healing in a way that is not possible from a Western healthcare provider. Traditional healing practices, these emphasize the balance between physical, spiritual, emotional, and social. And the practices, like I mentioned, they also include food. So when we eat country food that connects us to the land, to the animals, to one another, the sharing of foods, is certainly, part of our culture. It is very healing. But also the respect for elders and what they've experienced, what they've been through, and their knowledge of culture and language reinforces identity and wellness, but just spending time with elders is very healing in and of itself. The Canadian government's 2023 Indigenous Health Action Plan emphasizes integrating traditional medicine into primary care. I'm going to say that this is a federal government policy, and the provincial policies or the territorial policies have not always been aligned completely with the federal context. But this is an important guide for helping us to advocate for that kind of integration. And when we integrate traditional and Western approaches combined, we must consider how to integrate elder and traditional knowledge and medicines into Western practice. And this could be through the communication of those experiences with their healthcare providers so that these can be appropriately entered into a health record and understood by the healthcare provider as valid and valuable aspects of a care plan. Healthcare provider who seeks knowledge of elders and traditional healers can become familiarized with Indigenous ways of knowing and be a better support to their patient. Care plans that integrate therapeutic progress that include traditional and biomedical approaches is also necessary. An example of this would be a psychiatrist who has a patient who works with elders and goes to ceremony, whether that's a sweat lodge or some other form of ceremony. I'm speaking about a Cree patient right now who transformed, had a significant psychic change from the time that she started seeing elders as part of her treatment plan. Previously, she was on antidepressants and was getting psychiatric care and psychological care, but she really did not transform toward a healing recovery pathway until she started working with her elders. And so it's important for healthcare providers to recognize this, and if they can prescribe that or have elders that are part of the care team, this can be really helpful for ensuring that these kinds of practices get integrated into care plans. I share this. I think everyone here will kind of understand the connection between, the emotional, physical, mental, spiritual. And this is kind of a way for us to provide some a conceptual model to healthcare provider students to understand the cohesiveness of a holistic framework, and putting it into terms that they understand when we're conducting culturally safe education and training, but recognizing the benefits of these interwoven elements of our experience, of our well-being is important to understand the role of all of these different layers when we're looking at the whole person. And I think that many Indigenous cultures also recognize the circle as a symbolic imagery of connectedness to community and to one another. And I also feel that that is depicted in this image um, for, um, for healthcare provider training. So trauma-informed care in health systems to appropriately align trauma-informed framework, acknowledge the historical trauma in care strategies, recognizing that healthcare systems are designed by legislation and policies and ultimately clinical guidelines that are operationalized. If we don't acknowledge historical trauma in those layers of policy frameworks, then we won't get it right. So provider training is important, but we also need to train policymakers so that they can change what is documented in legislation so that we can have the appropriate funding and the appropriate decisions made for informing or including trauma-informed care in systems. And so that means reframing healthcare to incorporate our perspectives into diagnoses, care plans, and mental health interventions. So currently, if a diagnosis is based on a psychiatric scale, a cognitive tool, a cognitive scale, or some other assessment that doesn't consider what our experiences have been as a result of colonization, then we can be improperly assessed and ultimately misdiagnosed. So there's potential of lack of culturally safe mental health assessments, and certainly a need for more training. It's one thing to provide training on the impacts that we know about, but it's also another to look at how we can change mental health assessment tools. The Cowichan tribes in British Columbia have taken a cognitive assessment test and replaced that with language and imagery. This particular test happened to have imagery on it that they found that was not appropriate for their peoples, for their elders in particular. And so they made that more appropriate so that the patient could be more properly assessed by the healthcare provider, as an example. So addressing system barriers, there is that lack of cultural understanding, and the systemic racism perpetuates, and there are these bureaucratic hurdles. So no matter how much training healthcare providers have, their only new path for healing would be ensuring that there is self-determination in health systems by integrating traditional and medical practices. According to the World Health Organization, integrating traditional medicine into national health systems has been successful in some countries, highlighting the importance of preserving local Indigenous knowledge. The need to also consider how this will impact healing across generations. not only will promote trauma-informed, culturally safe healthcare, but it addresses both past and present wounds. It's very important to consider the contemporary context that we're dealing with, and how these historical injustices have impacted current generations or the next generations. And so we can have a call to action that healthcare systems can embrace Indigenous wisdom to create a sustainable path to heal for future generations. The World Health Organization Summit on Global Summit on Traditional Medicine highlights the significance of integrating traditional medicine interventions into health systems, and that 88% of countries who utilize practices like Indigenous medicines, herbal medicine, and acupuncture have been successful. So building a culturally grounded mental health framework ensures that we have a working group engagement. So at the level of community where you can get involved, there's trust and there's guidance by elders, like for Indigenous protocols that are aligned with your community. And implementing trauma-informed, strengths-based approaches that honor Indigenous healing traditions and lived experiences are part of the framework, as well as supporting a co-development of research and policy that integrates Indigenous and Western mental health perspectives. The inclusion of research, I know that there's certain sentiments that we have been researched to death. We don't need more research. We know these things. Sometimes research can be helpful to offer the language and documentation for making some of those changes. So if not a researcher, maybe a policy person who can put together work plans and reports that are based on what you want said, that can be incorporated to policymakers. Some communities that have very strong health departments and a health director have been able to be very creative in how they've been able to work with research and policy to advocate for changes at the Health Canada level, or at the First Nations Inuit Health Branch, or ISC, and also in the devolution of policy and practice and operational practice at the nation level. And so we've seen this in some communities that have been able to advocate for more care in community versus sending elders outside of community. And I think that can also be applied to how mental health gets supported in the community versus sending people away. To develop a multi-level framework, so a multi-level intervention is research, but you can consider how it can be applied to your program. So a mental health program that looks at how an individual can access mental health in a way that supports them at the individual level. And so if that's from a traditional context, there's the ceremonial and land-based aspect of that, but that also includes the kinds of support that they would get from the system. And is the support that they're getting leading to good outcomes? So basically focusing on the individual, that's what a lot of our health, epi data would essentially include. We look at an individual and then rolled up at the community level or collective level. The interpersonal level would be more related to family, how healing is impacting the overall family. We know that certain children that growing up together might struggle with similar mental health conditions, or one condition impacts the other. And so how to support them through group ceremonies in the community is important. And also assessing how treatment is supporting that individual and impacting the family as a whole. At the organizational level, at the community organizational level, like the Department of Health, there you would be evaluating practices and training to facilitate that kind of integration. The health director in a First Nation would lead this. It could also have support from chief and council, and we can also see this at the hamlet level in a Inuit community. But this is sometimes challenging because the nursing station might be federal or territorial managed. But there are ways. There are ways to do this. And then finally, at the community structural level, we consider the broader determinants of health, governance, and policies that can help support these kinds of initiatives on an ongoing basis. And I want to read the quote here: to heal a nation, we must first heal the individuals, the families, and the communities. Spoken by Art Solomon, Anishinaabe elder. Co-designing and piloting integrated models, collaborating with Indigenous communities and mental health practitioners to co-design integrated Indigenous healing practices into clinical care. This is really critical that if there is, say, trauma-informed mental health practitioners coming to your community, having conversations with them about your local context is very important, and that you can have an approach and start off, if you are working with clinical settings, to pilot to ensure that those cultural protocols are respected, and really holding the clinic accountable to ensure that the Indigenous perspectives are guiding the adaptation of practices. And so if designing something, then really ensure that you have some framework for evaluation or follow-up to ensure that that model is successful. And so that's not only collecting and analyzing data from people involved, but it's also adjusting and refining based on that feedback to make improvements. We're never going to get everything right at the first kick of the can. So in order to really have a successful outcome and sustainable outcome, this does require that level of involvement. So for evaluation and effectiveness, this can be done many different ways. There's all the metrics that we can collect, but we want to ensure that those are aligned with our beliefs and traditions. I think in the past we've relied on government measurement tools, but sometimes those have resulted in data that really doesn't translate well to what we need. So looking at those metrics and understanding the definitions of those, and perhaps maybe even adding some that would be more in line with your own traditions. Sometimes that might even include, if there's no words for it in the English language, is using other context, other language and context to be able to describe metrics that are more meaningful to your community. And patient outcomes. So it's sometimes harder to do, but if you're doing research or have people like a health director who is able to look at aggregate level data, or you have the regional health surveys in your community that provide excellent data for how to look at, not only the overall social determinants, but you can also track improvements in mental health outcomes at the community level based on some of the new approaches that you're involved in. So if you are doing more land-based exercises in your community, ensure that there's some tracking of that somehow, and certainly, asking elders about their impressions and observations about how that is doing is equally as important to data. And then comparing some of these integrated care outcomes with some of the previous ways that mental health has been provided in your community. Assessing long-term mental health community cohesion over time is important, and enabling input from healthcare providers, even teachers, and others who are involved in your community for a long time can be helpful to make adjustments to these care models. And then there's also like impacts. By this is important when we're dealing with government. When we can demonstrate return on investment for new ways of doing things, there's more likelihood that these will be funded over time. And so I think that there's lots of ways that our self-governing bodies look at these kinds of impacts. And so certainly for mental health programming, this would not be any different. Knowledge translation and dissemination is very important because the ways in which we approach mental health from a program and delivery level may not be completely understood by the individual. And so we need to present findings from research, but also interventions in a way that can be understood and relatable. Sometimes individuals, they don't need all the background stuff. They just need care. They just need help. And so having storytelling or other ways, even using digital media in Facebook and other kinds of mechanisms that youth connect nowadays can be really helpful, especially if elders are not as accessible in some communities. In cities, for example, this is important, or for individuals who are going to school and away from their home community, this is very important. And so there's ways to do this together with people who do this for a living to ensure that your community voices are represented, not only in research, but communication platforms like social media. And also having workshops for healthcare providers when you have new people coming to work in your community. It's very important that they understand, the kinds of models that you put in place. And policy briefs are important for, you may have some knowledge of this and it's not documented. So having documentation so that maybe your health director would work with other kinds of institutional leaders or government agencies to ensure that you've got value and evidence for integrating your own practices and how you're managing those programs. And then having community-driven events will also ensure that these programs are understood by community members, valued by community members, but they're also done in such a way that respects the cultural norms of the community and also the ownership of that knowledge that is specific to that community. To have sustained partnerships and to build capacity, I think some of the most important pieces are mentorship. But before we can mentor, we need training and we need co-leadership models and we need funding. So it's a multi-layered approach, but you're considering community members to serve as cultural liaisons. The best mental health navigators are the ones who have been there themselves. So often people who are in recovery or have experienced mental health in some form or another, whether themselves or in their family, often serve as the best advocates. It's really important to have a navigator, I think. Sometimes we need a navigator just to advise and maybe send somebody off in the right direction. They know who to contact. Then there's individuals who we can, walk with a little bit, kind of be there, maybe a little more than just, providing information, a little more guidance. And then there's individuals that actually need us to hold their hand through the whole process. And so these are individuals who would not be able to do that for themselves. And so that navigation is really important. And then being able to share this with other kinds of community leaders who may not actually do that navigation themselves, but understand the value and importance of it. So they can advocate for this kind of form of navigation. And they can also advocate that funding and resources are in place. The other things that are important to consider is the policies. So I mentioned the 2023 report by the Canadian government. So using that is really important to advocate for policy changes. And someone who is familiar with policy language so that they can recognize and incorporate those, but also have knowledge of local practices. So those can be aligned well with Western medical frameworks. Um, Research is important. Like I said earlier, a lot of people think we don't need it, but it's always important that we continue to train people who do research because we always need people doing research. And if we have individuals from our own community in these kinds of roles, the more educated they are, and if they're at the master's level, they're going to be able to do quite a bit for your community and be involved with, boards and committees that actively promote and ensure that practice integration for mental health is happening. So that concludes my presentation. I'm just so honored to have this chance to present this to you today. I say matna, I say miigwech, I say thank you, and leaving you with this quote from Lo Nokrachisak. People like to go out on the land to feel good. If they can't go out on the land, they don't feel like people. And that is so true. I find that every time I go back to my community, it's like I'm reborn every single time. So I think one of the main things I want to get across here is that land-based healing is probably the best healing that can be complemented with trauma-informed care and other kinds of clinical practices that can support our communities heal today and for next generation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Clark. He'll be available on Zoom for questions, and we do have about 8 minutes to 10 minutes for those questions, so we do have a little bit of time. And if there's any questions, I would ask you to go to a microphone and so that everyone can hear you, and just give us a minute or two to get them online here. Too. So thank you for your presentation, and we're going to move into Q&A, and there's a couple of questions. Orange shirt there.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's an excellent question because cultural safety training, when it was first iterated a few years ago, colleagues of mine um, felt really strongly that we were really dealing with, um, anti-racism. And it wasn't until after the death of Brian Sinclair in Winnipeg Hospital that we were able to really demonstrate not only the racism that he experienced, but also, pardon me, the systemic racism, which was really the whole system of errors that compounded his experience and ultimately his death. Um, and so when we look at, there's a few ways to approach it. I mean, you could also consider like the practical implications of having good training because ultimately if you have better health outcomes, ultimately you're going to have better patients to manage. And I know that's sort of in theory, but I think it can be demonstrated. Um, what is really important, I think, is the application of the knowledge that we offer in the training currently. Um, and I think I alluded to this a little bit in my talk like a moment ago. It's one thing to train on what we know the impacts are. And I think people, healthcare providers may have some background, although I'm constantly surprised that by medical students that they have never heard of the residential school systems ever in their lives. So we need to give them that background. But then they need to know how to apply it. And this is where you start seeing better improvements in the system. So, for example, and I'm going to speak to mental health because that's my area, but when you have better health assessments that can properly diagnose somebody based on having knowledge of what the impacts of history have been on somebody, whether that's intergenerationally or within their current experiences, because remember this compounds, you can have better care plans and ultimately that will lead to better health outcomes. Um, I've heard a lot of healthcare providers ask me, okay, I've taken this training, I really want to help, but I don't know what to do because our system is so broken. And this is why we need others in government and those that work on clinical guidelines and things like that. So when you can make changes, like even like a discharge guideline in a hospital in a province was written for a provincial patient. And so if you're being discharged to a First Nation jurisdiction. So when we have actual practical knowledge of our realities, you can make changes, but this does require a certain level of expertise. So some people might not be interested in that at all. They're super busy, overworked, yada, yada. But I do find that some individuals that have taken this have come and said, I had no idea, right? And they have that sort of, come to the light moment where they've realized that, they can actually make a difference. I think the other thing that is really important is recognizing that there are impacts that are beyond what the health system can do. So in Inuvik, they're actually changing the way they deal with mental health patients. If anyone is here in the room from there or has been there and have seen the teepee outside the hospital and how mental health and addictions patients are getting access to the teepee and to elders and to ceremony while they're in hospital. That's an example of some of the change that can happen, but we need to make the healthcare providers aware of that and then work and collaborate with them. And then there's the really, really busy healthcare provider that just doesn't have time. So I think doing smaller
take and you know, if someone is working in a, like even in the city of Edmonton, where I live, and I would say like in some, you know, at some times, there's probably up to 50% of patients are Indigenous. So if you're a care provider and you have a lot of Indigenous patients, like this training is going to help you do your job better. So we need to get that across, like all the benefits of the training. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier, when it was first designed, it really wasn't enough. It was so historical, or it like just kind of the basic stuff, because no one knew anything about it. But we have to make it suitable to their world. And so if they're clinicians, or you might look at an assessment that would be normally done this way, and you look at it with an Indigenous lens and look at it a little bit differently. And ultimately, when you can provide better care as a healthcare provider, that's going to be more fulfilling. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. We have one more person that would like to ask questions, so pass it on to you.
It was very informative, and I'm very honored to be here to be able to listen in on that. And what I'd like to ask is if we could get copies of the presentation, and also I've been invited to speak on the barriers, challenges, and struggles to mental health and wellness at the LCAC conference in Gatineau at the end of the month. And so I would like to request permission to use some of the information in your slideshow for when I'm presenting, because I feel like it just fits hand in hand. Obviously giving you the credit.
Well, and actually there's a lot of other Maria Braveheart Looking Horse. She's an American, North American Indigenous person who really started some of this work, and Christina Walters also, she basically walked the Trail of Tears down here, like to Oklahoma, where her ancestors actually made that trek. And she did that with students and family members. Bombay, she's Canadian, at Dalhousie. She was one of the researchers who did the work on epigenetic research that was the same methodology that was used on Japanese internment camp and Holocaust survivors, where their genetic markers changed and passed on to their generations after those experiences. And the same thing happened with residential schools. So I'm happy to share the presentation with you. Please. Your conference goes very well.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughtful questions. And thank you, Dr. Clark, for your time. And certainly, you know, traditional medicine, healing, and wellness is so important to us all, and how it applies in various health-related focuses. So thank you very much, and I'll pass this back over to Joe. And I just wanted to share a little something that Joe was doing while he was sitting there. He was telling me.
That's what I expected. Like, you're doing fine. Stop. Anyway, we're going to take a break for 15 minutes. and then we'll get back into some projects that the IRS is doing, some updates and case studies, and we'll have a moderator for that. So enjoy your coffee break. I see there's some snacks up there. Enjoy. Just while you're on that, I noticed that a couple of times they spoke about artifacts being returned back to the people. It's interesting because last May I got a call from a person that used to work in Nuvik, and I met his dad in Kelowna about 6-7 years ago. Anyway, long story short, his dad was a retired Royal Northwest Mounted Police. And he took me to his home, and then I had lunch with him. And he was getting up in age. He must have been about 80 years old, I guess, this Royal Northwest Mounted Police. And he was stationed in Nuvik, Aklavik, Fort McPherson. He made periodic dog trips to Old Crow. And after lunch, he said, let's go down to my den. So I didn't know what the den meant, but we went downstairs, and here he had all kinds of artifacts from the native communities that he was stationed in, and they gave him all this stuff. And little did I know that about 2 years later, his son called me. Well, he said, I'm getting old, he said, and a lot of these native people that give me these gifts, I want to return it. I told him, gee, that's really nice of you. 2 years later, I get a call from his son, and he tells me, hey, Joe, I got a pair of snowshoes that your dad made and a dog whip too. And I said, gee, that's interesting, because I lived out on the land with my dad for about 30 years. And during those 30 years, he never, ever mentioned he's my dad. And he didn't even tell me he made snowshoes. I know he made dog whips, but he never told me he made snowshoes. And I told him, I think you got the wrong person, because my dad don't make snowshoes. And he said he did. So last May, he came into Whitehorse, and he said, 2 weeks later, before he came, he said, I'm coming to Whitehorse, and I have these snowshoes and dog whip to present to you. And wow, what a nice act of a person that got all these gifts from people, and he wanted to give it back. And I kind of called it like just giving back to the people. So I have a pair of snowshoes that were made about 60 years ago on my living room. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Enjoy your snacks. Merci. we're looking for one of our presenters, Caitlin. Caitlin Charlie, are you in and around the cultural center? If you are, or if anybody knows her, can you get her to come up to the front table there? Just got to organize her presentation. Merci. Got another little funny story for you while you're eating. So my grandmother's sister, she was about 70 years old, 75 years old, and she stayed home and her daughter was working at the school. So every day she would cook lunch for her daughter. So one day her daughter came back and her mother made her caribou soup. So she started eating the caribou soup and something didn't taste well. So she looked in it and she couldn't figure out what was different. So she asked her mom, "Mom, what you made in this soup?" She said, "Well, I put all this stuff in it and I put potatoes in it." Well, her daughter didn't see any potatoes in the soup, so she said, "Can you show me the potatoes?" So she looked underneath a cupboard and there was some kiwi fruit.
Hello, welcome back. God, I just screamed into the. Hi, welcome back. So good to see you all again. The next part of our program is going to be quite interesting. We have some case studies, and I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for this portion is Crystal Fraser. Crystal. Welcome, Crystal, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Dringwinzi, Shellicut, Shori, Crystal Gale Fraser, Vilji. She cut Juliet Mary Bullock, Shannon, to Inchu to at Bruce Fraser, Shitie to Inchu. Gu Yatesi Dichu, to at Marca Andre, Shitsu to Instal Fraser. I am the daughter of Juliet Bullock and Bruce Fraser of Inuvik. My late grandparents are Marca and Richard Bullock. I'm Gwich'ya Gwichin, originally from Inuvik, and our fish camp, Tree River, on the Mackenzie River in the Northwest Territories. I am also a NAC founding member, and I am an associate professor in history and native studies at the University of Alberta. So for our last panel this afternoon, we are going to be getting residential school project updates and hearing some case studies. We've had a slight change in our program, but what I'm going to do is introduce the folks as it's their turn to present. We do have a Q&A period at the end, and I can happily assure you that we will be staying on time because I have a daycare pickup at the end of the day. I'm here with my 18-month-old baby, so we're all going to be tired at the end of the day anyway. So first, I would like to invite Sandra Johnson up to introduce herself, and that is going to be our first presentation today by Sandra Johnson. So I am going to set a timer for 18 minutes, Sandra, and when you hear that go off, that is your 2-minute warning. Okay, thank you.
Wow, thank you. What an honor it is for me to be here. I feel such an honor to be part of this working group of Yukon Residential School and Missing Children Project. I am on the executive as the elder, and before I begin, I'd like to present to, what's his name again? I forgot. He's not, Harley, where's Harley? Okay. Oh, goodness, okay. As it's meant to be. All right. Welcome, everyone. It is, again, like I say, my pleasure. On behalf of the Yukon Residential School Missing Children Project, all the visitors that have come, you are so, so welcome. And we have several working group members in our presence. I would like to ask them to stand up and be acknowledged. Please stand. It looks like we might have a few missing. We have representatives from all 14 communities, and the work that we have been doing is difficult, challenging, but it has helped us to grow and make us stronger as well. Thank you very much. And before I get started, I hold up my hands to all the survivors of residential school. I myself am a survivor. I'm a third-generation survivor. My grandparents, except for my father's father, went to residential school way back in the 20s. My parents went to residential school, and I went to residential school. And I'm a mother of 3. I have 9 beautiful grandchildren, and I have 5 great-grandchildren. And I've worked on this healing journey of mine for years and years and years. And I feel that my destiny has been here to help our people. We are strong, strong spiritual people, all of us, First Nations people. And unfortunately, we've had a bad beginning since colonization began, because we have a tremendous amount of gifts to give to the world. And people have yet to recognize that. And a large part of it is our spirituality, and has helped us to be resilient and to survive, because we have much to offer to the world. Because through this journey in this life, as human beings all around the world, it's not just a matter of being us, it's human beings from all other nations in the world. We have this beautiful, spiritual, strong, spiritual gifts of our connection to the Mother Earth to share with the rest of humanity. Times are getting rough, as we are witness to right now. I'm not sticking to the speech, I'm sorry. I'm speaking from my heart, because we're going through rough times. Finally, we're acknowledged that, yes, we are telling the truth, but there's still people out there saying, it's not true, it's not true. It's like the Holocaust. They're saying that's false information. But it's not, it's the truth, and we're speaking the truth. Truth is so important, as one of our presenters previously talked about. It is important, and we are now speaking our truth. Now we have the courage to stand up and say, yes, this really did happen, and it's still happening in subtle ways, in different ways, and one of the ways is by cutting out the financial help that we need in order to get this work done. But we're going to do it. It's tough. It's probably going to get tougher before it gets better. But we're strong, resilient people. Remember that. We have much to offer the world. Always remember that. Be proud of who you are. That's what my grandpa, who never went to residential school, used to always tell me. Be proud of who you are. And remember, there's good and bad in everything. I didn't understand when he first told me that. I just thought that old man didn't know what he was talking about. But throughout my life, I've come to realize that. And the good that has come for me, I see, from my experience in residential school, as bad as it was, the good, it had enlarged my family to all those that I met in residential school. You are now my family. In every community I go to, I see survivors. If not them, then their children. So we have a connection. And our connection has grown with our work throughout Canada in this, what we're doing. Our connection today, from those of you who are not from here, continues because of this Truth and Reconciliation Project, because of what we had to go through when we had to tell our stories. I worked as a resolution health support worker for many years, and that was where I first met Joe, wonderful man there who is strong and has given me lots of support throughout my journey as well. Each of us help to each other stand up and be strong. And that's what we're here for. Not only for ourselves, as you all know, but for the generations to come. So we have a great destiny ahead of us. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'll try to find a way here to work it back in. We talk about history being accurate, and that's through our truth-telling. And I just want to say that I personally, and I'm sure all of you, continue to pray for the support and healing for all the families who seek the truth about their missing loved ones who never returned home. And from the government and church institutions, they deserve answers and they deserve peace. I'd like to commend all of you that are involved in this work. We're all together, that's our connection, all of us. We're all working, and that is our connection. And I pray for you and commend the work that you do. Thank you very much. Now we can start with the first slide, please. Or did I miss it? Slide number 2. Where am I? I'm sorry. Slide number 2 is about the Chutla Residential School. I don't have that button, so there's my talk down in there too. Woo! Talk about getting an elder who's not tech savvy, eh? Anyway. Oh, good, thank you. I know I'd get someone to support that. Slide number 2. Oh, okay. Shall I just go on talking anyway? Especially since time is passing here. Okay, our project started shortly after the announcement in 2015 about the potential graves being found in Kamloops, 215 rather. That was a real shock, I remember when that happened. Now, these findings were not unexpected, because we had all heard stories before, so it was just a matter of time. Currently, the project has conducted ground-penetrating radar at 3 former residential schools in the Yukon. Each site is at varying stages of the process. Now, our initial work started with the Chutla Residential School. That's where I went to school, in my home community of Carcross. In its day, it was the largest residential school in the Yukon. Over time, the working group's mandate was expanded to include all residential schools that once existed across our territory. The project includes working group members from each of Yukon's 14 communities who help to guide this work. Our mission is to conduct survivor interviews, archival research, and ground searches to uncover the truth about children who went missing from these Yukon institutions, including those who may be buried in unmarked grave sites. In June of 2023, we conducted our first ground penetration radar investigation at the Chutla Residential School site. And on September 26th of that same year, we came forward with our findings that there were 15 areas would require further investigation. Prior to starting the search, our team heard stories from community citizens that children could be heard playing in the area. But when they would go to search and check, they did not see the children, but they were still heard. Days after the initial search, we went back to Carcross and held a talking circle with the community. During our conversations, we were told the children were no longer heard in the area that was searched. I think it was because they finally got our attention. And as we know, that they're spiritual beings, and that was their way of asking for attention. And as also pointed out by one of our speakers prior, that they will never hurt us, so there's no need to be afraid, because as we all know, we continue our journey into the next life. But they are also helping us, almost like angels, is what I believe, and some of our elders that I've talked to believe that as well. And in January of this year, we returned to Carcross to follow up on additional searches in the area. Unfortunately, the equipment had some difficulty with the colder elements, and some areas will need to be revisited later this spring. The project will also take a closer look at the 15 flagged sites from our previous visit. 99% of the archival research has been completed for Chutla Residential School. Files remain open should additional information be found in the research of other schools. Now, there was supposed to be another slide, but I guess we don't have it. In April 1st last year, we conducted ground penetration radar on 2 more areas here in Whitehorse at the former sites of Yukon Hall and Kudare Hall. During the land claims process, each property was eventually transferred to one of the 2 local First Nation governments. The Yukon Hall site became a part of Kwandon First Nation land allocation, and Kudare Hall was transferred to the Ta'an Kutchin Council. Although both buildings have since been demolished, Judy has led that group, that process, and I remember attending. I still remember part of the team who brought together former students for one final walkthrough of Yukon Hall before it was torn down. It was a very emotional day for a lot of people. While we continue to wait for the full report, the project has received a preliminary assessment which indicates there are no areas of concern in these locations here in Whitehorse. However, before we can clear these sites, our technicians need to finalize its work in one zone due to equipment problems during their previous work or visit. The GPR work has been set for this spring. The archival research is in progress. Now, Whitehorse Baptist Residential School. The project has 3 other residential schools on its radar, the first being in Whitehorse. That was the Baptist Residential School. Unfortunately, we will not be able to conduct a GPR work at the former site. The area is in the heart of the city of Whitehorse and since has been cleared and developed. Nonetheless, the archival research is in progress and will continue. St. Paul's Hostel once operated in Dawson City. This location is slated for GPR work later this year. And archival research is in progress. Now, Shingle Point Residential School is a part of our mandate. We who recognize that many of the students may have come from the Northwest Territories and only a small number may have come from the Yukon, because this was early on, very early in our 19, I don't know, it was 15, or I can't remember the dates, but it's very early before, long before Chutla and long before St. Paul's. We are therefore attempting to establish a working relationship with our Northwest Territory colleagues in doing this necessary work. Our primary interest is in the Yukon students who attended the school. And Lower Post, 5 minutes, thank you. Before I wrap up on the schools, I would like to touch on Lower Post. While the Lower Post Residential School is not part of our mandate, it is a school that remains at the forefront for Yukon First Nations. Although the school was in northern BC, many Yukon students attended this school, and some of those students are members of our working group. For that reason, we have continued to keep our doors open in the hope of establishing and maintaining a strong working relationship with the local First Nation and their team. If we are to gain a full understanding on the impacts these institutions had on our children, it is important, vitally important, that we learn more about the Yukon students who attended. Now, when this is over, we will come back and give closing remarks and answers to any questions. Now, like it says in the video, moving forward is going to take us all, and that's what I alluded to before. We are all in this together. So, as laid out in the progress of our project here today, the future of our projects is uncertain. Many of you may have already heard severe funding cuts have been imposed on residential school projects like ours across the country. Some of us only received 24-25 funding approvals in recent months, and we look forward to March 2025. It's quickly approaching. While we know there will be further cuts, we just do not know the amount or if the program will continue. And with the federal election on the horizon, we face further uncertainties. The pressures being imposed by Trump at the border and the threats of tariffs could also impact our funding landscape. History has shown that when the government is seeking funds in one area, they often make cuts in others. This includes projects like ours. So we must consider the possibility that if another party is elected, our project may not receive the same level of support, like I referenced to earlier, if any support at all. There are no guarantees. We are still trying to determine what the impacts will be on our project. What we do know, these searches for residential schools who did not come home are important, not only in the Yukon, but across the country. At the same time, as voters, we must ensure this work remains a priority. A couple minutes here yet, ladies, I'm just about finished. Okay. No, it is about correcting a historical injustice that that was forced upon our people. It is up to all of us to ensure that this work continues and is left in a good place for our next generation and generations to come. Thank you very, very much for your attention and for the work that you do. Look after yourselves and be strong. Be strong and happy. We are here today. We're still survivors. We're strong survivors. And let go. And before I go, can I make that presentation yet? Do you have a representative? Where is Harley? Yes, where's Harley? Harley, where are you? Oh, Well, who can take this? Please come. Terry?
What a special gift. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.
Yes. So we will have a chance for the audience to ask questions of our panelists at the very end. Next, we have Desiree Blackjack. She is a proud Northern Tuchoni from the Crow clan. She was born in the Yukon and spent most of her young life immersed in the natural world, learning the rich cultural traditions and practices of her people from her grandparents, Roddy and Bessie Blackjack. Their teachings instilled in her a deep respect and understanding of her heritage, which continues to influence her personal and professional life. Her educational background is in business, nonprofit management, and hospitality. Her professional journey is marked by extensive experience in various roles. These experiences have equipped her with a diverse skill set and a strong foundation in organizational management. With a family history of leadership, Isikachua has also worked closely with her chief and council, gaining invaluable insights into First Nation self-government and leadership. She now advocates for individuals in addictions recovery and has been on her own healing path for 3.5 years. So I will welcome Desiree to the stage now.
Masicho, for inviting us to your traditional territory. I am a little bit nervous. I haven't done a presentation to a crowd this big in a long time, so if I do pause, just give me a second to collect my thoughts. But we did want to say thank you to Kwanlin Dun and Ta'an for inviting us onto their traditional territory. And I do want to say thank you to all the residential school survivors. Without you guys fighting, none of us would be here today. So, masicho. So the organization that I've started is called Thaik I Onate, and it means fly like an eagle, and we work with people in addictions recovery. We are a cultural organization that walk beside individuals on their healing journeys and recovery to create balance, happiness, health, and peace in their lives through cultural programming and healing and self-growth. We encourage healing for individuals at their own pace and comfort levels. So people are not, it's not mandatory for people to come to our programming. They can come when they want to come. It's a lot of words. So what is the problem that we are addressing? The Yukon issued a substance use health emergency on January 20th, 2022 due to the opioid-related deaths. It's not only that, but it's the alcohol deaths too, right? It's drugs and alcohol that we suffer from here. And since 2016, the overdose rates continue to rise. Our people say that they have no time to grieve anymore. There are too many deaths. Not only individuals and addictions are affected by addictions, it's everybody. It's the families, it's the communities, it's everyone. And I just want to introduce our new house manager, Robin Sayers. She's here with me today. She just started last week. We're very happy to have her on board. We are growing very quickly. She also has our pamphlets that she'll be walking around handing out as I do the presentation. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So we do this for, like I said, for the individuals who are on their healing journeys. They could be new in recovery, trailblazer with many years, are recovering from a recent relapse. And we also work with the families of individuals in recovery. We are a safe space for individuals at any stage in their recovery. And we are one of the only safe, sober spaces in the Yukon right now that people can come and hang out at. That threw me off. So there's a significant need in the Yukon for recovery aftercare. So the Yukon is actually on a rise right now with recovery aftercare, and it's so wonderful to see all the other programmings up and coming. But the communities are still suffering. There is no aftercare in the communities, or little aftercare. And that's where we're starting to put a lot of our focus we're working on a model right now that we're taking into the communities so we can teach them this aftercare model. So why do we want to do this? Mostly everybody on our team is in recovery. I have 3.5 years lived experience. I was stuck in my addictions for probably about 10 years, a whole decade, before I decided that enough was enough. I was at that very dark, hopeless, defeated place when I decided that I needed help. Not that I wanted it, but I needed it. It wasn't an option for me. And everyone on our team wants to pass the teachings that we've all learned on our recovery journeys to get better onto other people so that they can get better too. And we do genuinely care about the people who come into our programming. Once they're in with us, we'll check up on them. We'll see how they're doing. If they don't come around, we'll ask them if everything's okay. And we're always happy when they come back, when they choose to come back. So what is our goal? Aside from the addiction issues, there's the intergenerational trauma, homelessness, lack of education. These are just some of the issues that we are dealing with. Combining Native culture and Western ways of healing provides healing techniques in the Yukon that will be adaptable to each participant. And just to clarify, we are not a treatment center and we are not second stage. We help individuals that choose to walk their healing path in recovery to deal with the underlying issues in their lives to find peace within. You think our nervousness would go away by now? Thank you. So part of our vision is to create partnerships. We want to create more unity with other organizations in and around the Yukon so we can all start working together and we can all start filling these gaps together. As we're growing, we're creating those partnerships as we go. And our mission is designed to assist individuals at their own pace to be confident to make healthy, peaceful, and informed life choices through cultural programming and recovery, wellness, and self-care. And our value, creating a healthier tomorrow for families, communities, and future generations. So these are some steps at a glance that I created when I first started this. Step 1 is acceptance. We have to accept that recovery is our new way of life. Step 2, where are our emotions at in recovery? That's when we start learning to feel the feels, which is very new to a lot of us and partially a lot of why we chose to numb them, right? So now we're starting to face them. And then step 3, once we learn emotional regulation, we start looking at ourselves and finding ourselves, creating that happiness and self-love within ourselves. And that was a huge step. I had to start by looking in the mirror and telling myself I loved myself, and I didn't believe myself. So it took a while, but then you start believing it after a while, and these are what we want to teach other people as well. And then once you start finding out what makes you happy and creating that self-love, then you start creating yourself, asking yourself, what do you want to do? What do I want to be? What do I want to be? What do I want to do? And how do I want to help? And then we start working on that. So for the programming, we do follow the medicine wheel, so to balance our spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical health. And that's really important in recovery. On the first year of my own recovery, I worked on my mental, my emotional, and my physical, but I didn't work on my spiritual. And I felt this huge void, like something was missing inside of me. Until I started working on all 4 of them together, that's when I finally felt at peace within my own body. So it's really important to balance the 4. And it's not just sometimes, but it's a balance I have to work on almost every day. So the aftercare supports that we have here in Whitehorse, we have drop-in. That's Monday to Friday, 12 until 4. And I just want to give recognition to the Arctic Inspiration Prize. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have our drop-in center right now. So we're very grateful to that funding. And at the drop-in, you can come in, have fresh bannock, fresh harvested medicine that we get from the land. You can sit and talk with our team, or you can just choose to be in a safe, sober space. If it helps someone from falling off or relapsing, we're more than happy to share that space with them. If they just want to sit, that's fine. And we do have an elder that comes in and does sewing with us on Thursdays. On Mondays, we're going to start bringing in another elder to do bannock making. So it's, we're ever growing. The ideas keep coming, so. And then we have dinner and Mile in Your Moccasin stories on Thursdays. Somebody comes in, tells their recovery story, and that's from 4:30 to 6:30. A meal is provided, dinner is provided. We can also provide rides to any of our programming with advance notice. And Saturdays, we used to have adult cultural wellness, and we alternated with family reconciliation days. But we took a look at programming, and there's enough barriers already in place for people to get aftercare programming. So we've opened up all of our programming to children. So now all of our programs you can bring your kids to. And then on Saturdays, we'll go out on the land, we'll do cultural activities, we have an elder, we pick medicine, we've made shelters, emergency shelters. We bought this like little skidoo. It's not the prettiest, but the kids love it. And that's what it's for. It's for them to have fun. So these are some of the pictures from our programming. We had Ethan from Cedars come and visit us. We went out to Carcross to go and visit an elder. He took us out to harvest medicines, made some bannock. We had the Grand Chief come over from NWT and have a visit with us. And that bottom picture is my oldest daughter learning to drum with one of our LSCFN elders. So for the community supports, we offer healing groups and workshops. We do 2 to 3 day workshops in the communities. We offer healing group circles, and I'm also a trained recovery coach. So we have peer-to-peer supports too. So I can offer 1-hour sessions in the communities when we come to the communities. And the train-the-trainer model that I touched on briefly, we've worked with CarMax, Little Salmon CarMax, for about 9-10 months now, trying to create a model in the community that we can take into all the communities once we're ready. We have about 5 or 6 other communities waiting for us right now. So once this model is finalized, and we're probably about 2-3 months away from that now, we can take this into the other communities. So we're actually really excited to be able to offer something to the communities, knowing that it'll make a difference there. So this is our community programming. The one closest to me, that's in Dawson, and that's working with their wellness team at the time. The one in the middle is in Pelly, and the one on the far left is in Mayo. all very beautiful communities that we've visited. So for the healing support groups, we do send out posters and monthly calendars on a monthly basis. If you would like to be added to the email list, the email is on the back of the pamphlets that have been handed out to everybody. And each person who comes into our programming is screened. This is very important. As our house is a safe, sober space, we have to make sure that people coming into our program are on the same path as us, that they want to be in recovery, that they want that help. We don't deal with people who are court-ordered because they have to be there. We would like to, but then that puts our participants at risk and potentially could put us at risk too. So everybody does go through a screening, and rides, like I said, are available to and from groups in Whitehorse. And please text us in advance because we are very busy and we have a small team right now. So participants of TKA are referred to as resilient warriors. We don't call them clients. We like to call them friends, our resilient warriors. And it doesn't matter how many attempts it takes them. If they relapse, they are more than welcome to come back. We encourage them to come back. The quicker that they can come back and hang out with us, then the better it is for their healing journey. So I know that there's a lot of stigma around that. People feel shame. They feel guilt. A lot of them don't come back for a long time. But that's something as a society that we need to start changing for them, to tell them that it's okay that you relapsed. Please go back and get the help that you were getting. It's not that they slipped, it's just that they're missing something in their toolbox that we need to find. So, and individuals can choose to share their life journey to inspire others that are mile in your moccasin stories. So if anyone wants to tell their recovery stories, we are always looking for people on Thursdays to tell their stories. If you're from out of Whitehorse, we can set you up on Zoom as well. So please help us share your stories. So this was a surprise visit from Don Burnstick. I was actually picking him up at the airport for my First Nation. They asked me if I can transport him. And he was wanting me to run all over Whitehorse. And I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Burnstick, I can't. I have to go to work. And he said, oh, what do you do? So I told him what I did. And he said, okay, I'm going to come with you. I said, okay. So dropped his stuff off. And I didn't tell anybody he's coming. And there's this lady standing there getting smudged. She had her eyes closed. And we walked in together. And the guy smudging her was watching Dawn because everybody was surprised, and he walked away and that girl was standing there for a long time. And then Dawn stood in front of her. She opens her eyes and he said, "You want a hug?" It was fun. So, but Dawn is actually a huge advocate for healing as well too. So it was really nice to have him there and hear his wise words. So these are the beginning programs that we have as our resources expand. Our programming will expand as well. And I just wanted to touch on that quickly as well. We are hiring, trying to add to our team right now to be able to expand our services into the community. So we're looking for people who want to be trained as recovery coaches, as well as people who are good at creating programming. So those are the two positions that we're looking for. Programming would be full-time, recovery coaching is part-time, potentially can go into full. So all of our program, we walk with the people and create programming by the people for the people. Everything that we've done since day one came from the people and from the elders. We get advised by our elders for everything we do as well. So if you're on your recovery healing journey, tired and need support, or know somebody who is, come walk with us. We can walk the path together to a healthier lifestyle. We don't, oh, what did I do? There we go. We don't tell people what to do. We don't tell people what they need because we don't know that. We don't know what people need in their healing journeys, because everybody heals different. But what we can do is point you to different resources. We can sit there and we can listen and we can tell you what we've been through in our own healing journeys and just be there with you and help you. So, I don't think I can play this, but it was a testimonial of Beatrice Stewart. She was in our programming since day one. I'm not sure if, is it possible to play that video? So Beatrice started coming to our programming since we started it, and she barely missed any of it. And she kept on bringing tons and tons of people. So I was like, this woman's amazing, right? She knows everybody. She's bringing lots of people, so we hired her. And then after we hired her, she stopped bringing people. It's like, oh, what the heck? But she is, and she's a celebrity on TikTok, so she knows how to get people in.
Good morning. I had an awesome week. I never did a video for a while, but we're starting a class today called Opportunities Yukon, and this week on Sunday I went to our group, Teiki Eninti. I don't know if I spelled it right, but we went there, and for the last 2 months I don't know what I've been feeling. I don't know how. I'm learning how to deal with my feelings and emotions, and so I don't know how I felt, but for 2 months I felt like I was gonna, I don't know, just like I felt like I was gonna give up or something. But I'm so glad for Desiree's group. She runs a group for people that are trying to get clean and sober, and we go to that one camp every Sunday and Wednesdays, so I'm so glad for that. What else? Oh, and yesterday I went to our first day of class for greasing gears, and that's how to look after your vehicle for maintenance and repair. So like small repairs and stuff. So that's gonna be good. And yeah, so I'm feeling 100% today. I think that's just little patches you go through when you're healing. You feel down and stuff, and then after that you just get a burst of energy, and everything is. So this Sunday we did we did a burning ceremony, so that really helped. I just felt light, and everything just got clear after we did that burning ceremony. It was pretty cool, and yeah, so this week I know it's gonna be good, and yeah, don't forget to make somebody smile today. Have a good day, everybody.
She's pretty awesome. Okay, so I've got about 5 minutes left, so I'll have to speed this up a little bit. So we have partnered with Capri Zeroni from Dawson City. She does Yukon, Recovery Stories Yukon, and she's on Spotify. If you go to her platform, you'll see a bunch of stories from people around the Yukon. My recovery story is actually on there too. If anybody's interested in doing their story to podcast, you can reach out to Capri, or you can also reach out to us and we can connect you with her. she's pretty amazing. So last year was our first Relay for Hope and On the Land retreat. This is going to be an annual event that we're going to host. It was on August 31st, August 30th to September 1st, but August 31st was National Addictions Overdose Awareness Day. And the idea was to get healers together so that we can all come together and perform work together, and so everybody can know what their resources are. And at the same time, we had a conference where we brought in leaders. There was the Health and Yukon Government Health Director. There was Ranch Pelage. We had Blood Ties. We had the Wellness Center from CYFN. There was a few more players too, but they were all people strategically asked to be there so we can sit around together. We also asked the chiefs to come out too, so we can sit around and talk about the issues of the Yukon, the addiction issues, the death rates, all that stuff, so we could sit around a fire and traditionally talk about what was happening. And it actually turned out to be a very powerful event. It wasn't a lot of people at this first gathering, but it was beautiful. So we do foresee this next event being a lot bigger. So, and there'll be a lot more invites to it as well. So recovery coaching. We held a recovery coaching workshop in 2024. We trained 20 new recovery coaches here in the Yukon. That was the first recovery coaches that we had here in the Yukon. And now we are planning to bring them back again for phase 2. The first training trained up half the recovery coaches in all the communities, plus 5 in Whitehorse. This next training will finish training the communities, so we have 2 recovery coaches in every community, and we'll have about 10 in Whitehorse. Yeah, so that we'll finish that project this year. And these are the trained recovery coaches from 2024. We're always looking for elders and knowledge keepers to come and share your knowledge with us. We do pay honoraria, so if you are interested or know somebody who's interested, we are always looking to elders to teach us. And I just want to say thank you to all of our funders. Arctic Inspiration Prize, we partner with Little Salmon Carmax, our funders, Council of Yukon First Nations, YSPOR, and of course the Yukon Government Health and Wellness, as well as Justice Wellness Center. So without them, we couldn't do the work we do. So the information to contact us is on the pamphlets that has been given to you. There's the phone number, there's the email if you want to connect with us. And we do have a Facebook page and a website that we update regularly. And I just wanted to say that I'm honored to be up here right now. As a second-year residential school survivor, the reason why I started this is because I want to break the cycle. I want to break the cycle not only for myself, but my children, and now helping other people to break that cycle as well. And I'm a strong advocate for intergenerational healing. Merci.
Can get this perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Desiree. As a reminder, we are going to take questions at the end. And I also see that Harley is back. I hear some ringing. Okay. And Sandra gifted some muklaks to the table. And Terry received that on behalf of NAC. So thank you. Okay, so our final panelist today is Sena Uliak from Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. He's a researcher for missing Inuit children of residential schools at the Manitoba Inuit Association. Over the past year, he has worked with the NCTR to identify and repatriate Inuit and children who passed away in residential schools in Manitoba. He took the first year of Inuit studies at Nunavut Sivuniksavut, and this is his first notable project that he is working on and is very invested as an Inuk and somebody who is related to residential school survivors. The betterment of Inuit has always been a big motivator for Senna, and through a project like this, he can help Inuit heal and move forward. So please join me in welcoming Senna to the stage.
Hello, everybody. This is my first time presenting in front of this many people. So again, like the presenter before me, just give me a second if I seem to slip up at all. I am extremely nervous, as you can tell. And I also apologize, I don't have a presentation with me. I was working on one, but last night I overrode it with another presentation I was working on. So I'm really doing, if that doesn't make the nervousness worse, I'm doing this kind of winging it. So yeah, thank you for your patience beforehand, and I apologize in advance. So I am a researcher for the Missing Inuit Children in Residential Schools at the Manitoba Inuit Association. We are a team of 3 right now. We have 2 researchers and 1 community liaison. Our team started last year in January, but our director, Gail Grubin, has been working on this program for 2 years. So we were able to hit the ground running once we started once the team was formed. So instantly last January, we started working with the NCTR's public archives. We were given a bunch of quarterly returns to look at, and so we started our work doing that, managing, kind of creating a database for ourselves for any Inuk that we may have found in those quarterly returns. It didn't take us long to get access to the internal archives of the NCTR, which was able to very much open up our work due to the high volume of files and records that they have. So far we've been able to confirm 8 children, Inuit children that have passed away in residential schools in Manitoba. We have two of them are confirmed. We have their confirmed burial sites as well. So our community liaison is working on contacting those families to see if they want to be commemorated or repatriated back home. Other than that, we have about 20 unconfirmed names though, because of like the amount of missing gaps that the NCTR does have. But yeah, like that's for 1 year of work so far, I feel like that's really great progress for us, especially for Inuit when it came to a lot of record keepings. It was very like little to no detail. If anything, they were just given their like E numbers or W numbers, and there was no names. It was just like maybe even a description of just a boy or a girl being moved to this place. So we have had some setbacks in terms of that, trying to look for, trying to confirm Inuit names with the NCTR there. So we are working with other archival organizations like the Library and Archives Canada, Manitoba Archives, and like the provincial churches as well. Although that does have their own setbacks with taking time. It costs money to see some of the files we would like to see as well. And especially if they're only physical records, they're usually kept in Ottawa, which is quite of a trip as well for us. So those are just some of the setbacks we have found when it comes to like archival research. So excuse me, but yeah, like that's, I'm the other researcher and I, We kind of have two methods. We have each a method that we kind of go through in terms of confirming Inuit names. My specialty is kind of looking for an Inuk name in a quarterly return, in a memorandum, or like general admissions, a withdrawal, and I'll follow them. I'll create a timeline going forward to see if I can find a death record or a burial site for them, and my other fellow researcher will do the opposite, where he'll look at death records or cemetery records, and then he'll work back trying to see if those children attended residential schools. So I feel like those are the two kind of prominent ways we've been confirming Inuit names so far when it comes to the work with the NCTR. In July of last year, we went to Churchill to gather statements and work with the hamlet and church there to, we worked with the hamlet to, establish like a relationship for that, so that we can perform GPR searches there someday, and as well as confirming that they have, like we have their support in the matter, as well as we worked with the church to, they provided us a cemetery kind of plot listing that was very valuable for our work, and that was how we were able to confirm the two children, their two burial sites. The statement gathering did not go as well as we'd planned. It did happen on Canada Day too, though, so I think that might have played a part in it. We are planning on going back to Churchill in the spring and in the summer as well to gather more statements, and our team has acquired GPR equipment, so we'll be training on that and performing searches in Churchill, and hopefully work with the government of Nunavut and NTI to maybe do some searches in Chesterfield Inlet and other residential schools in Nunavut. On September 30th of last year, we held a commemoration event for the children that we have found so far. We unveiled a bench and plaque at the Assiniboine Park at the Leaf. So it's just like right there, front and center, just a commemoration of the children that did not make it home. We do plan on giving more or having more commemoration like plaques and everything in Churchill and Chesterfield and any other places where we may find Inuit children. With our work so far, the past year has been very heavily focused on archival research, and since we've run into a lot of dead ends there, our team is very much kind of pivoting how we're going to be doing our work for the next year. So we're going to be very much relying on statement gatherings and GPR searches to kind of hopefully fill in a lot of the gaps that we do have in our files right now. I also just learned earlier with the NCTR presentation that the vital statistics with Manitoba, they've also just recently started a partnership, which is great because we've also just partnered up with the vital statistics in Manitoba as well to provide them with the names and e-numbers we do have and that we haven't been able to confirm, and they'll be able to look through their files for us. So that's another breakthrough we've just recently have in terms of our work. So yeah, that's really what we've been doing for the past year. Our team has been very busy, and we hope to continue to be even more busier. So our hope eventually is to continue to work to create a whole database of all of the files pertaining to any Inuk that attended residential schools in Manitoba. We've also worked with the MKO to become the Churchill community lead for the vocational center search there. So we also have the supports from the First Nations organizations in Manitoba as well. So it's we seem to be very much taking the lead role in any searches or any work regarding the Churchill vocational centers. Yeah, that's kind of the big points I have written down so far. I would like to thank you all so much for your patience, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, wonderful. So 3 very rich and different presentations. I would like to open the Q&A period. I've been told by the panelists that they're most comfortable answering questions from their tables. So we may need to do a little bit of coordination with the microphones if that'll work. But any questions for Sandra, Desiree, or Senna? Don't be shy.
We have the mics here for people who want to answer the questions.
There is a question. You might need to stand up and go to one of the microphones if that's okay. So if you could please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Who's first? Audrey Baker from South First Nation. I just want to commend Desiree on the program she's starting. I think for too long we've been sending out our people outside of Yukon for treatment. And looking at what she started, her program, I think it's going to work because a lot of them come back and then they fall back. I know of this one guy that came home and his sister was just shocked that he fell off wagon and he said, "Don't ball me up." He said, "You know what happened to me?" He said, "I got lonesome." He said, "Nobody talked to me anymore. Nobody visited me. I got lonesome." He said, so. And we have to look at ways of really helping our people through programs like she started. I think it's going to work, and especially with the residential school survivors, because a lot of us were traumatized as children, and it's going to take a long time for us to go through our own healing process. And some of them that did go through it, they have to work on themselves every day, because you go through these traumas as a little kid, Some of them are 4 or 5 years old, and they're traumatized until they're about teenagers, I guess, and maybe right into adulthood. I think we need programs like that right in our own communities, right in the Yukon, and hopefully that will really, really help us. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello. My question is for Sandra Johnson with the IRS project. I'm just wondering how you guys you said you started your GPR search in June 2023, and you got results back already in September of 2023. Just wondering, how you guys got your results back so fast. Oh, sorry, my name is Trisha Campbell, and I'm part of the Beauval Indian Residential School. I'm the researcher in ARC for this.
Thanks, Tricia.
I'll let Judy answer this, as she's our chairman. they've done it, it's entirely in their hands after when they give us the response.
Other questions or comments?
We're going to wait here till 6. And we should get it.
So a question or comment from Judy.
You know, I was working with this mic here for 30 years. Never fit me yet.
I'm going to stand up on this one because I'm the same way with Audrey. I really like to give a real high regards and congratulations to Desiree.
Yeah.
Look at her, such a young, beautiful person, and she's got it all together. She shared her story with us. How powerful is that? And it should help a lot of us. And have some of our people reach out to her. You have to tell other people that are going through what they're going through that they can reach out to this beautiful lady and this company that she has started. And every community, it's there. They can go in there and train your people within your community to deliver this. So I want to give her congratulations. I remember when they were going to receive the funding, she said, Judy, you got to come with me, you got to come up with me. I said, nope. How do you think I learned? Just go up there and speak. So I was just really so touched. I just had to come up and say something. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I have a question for Sana, if that's okay. I resonated a lot with what you said about the challenges of naming children and how you know, with Raymond's talk, we heard about the archive as this incomplete record. And so I guess on a practical level, are you able to share a little bit about how you just organize this content and keep track of people?
I don't think we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't bite. It doesn't bite.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very localized. We keep all of the confirmed and unconfirmed children's names in an Excel sheet with all of the relevant information assigned to them. It's not very much more sophisticated than that right now, but we are like still very much like kind of working on building up that database. Yeah.
And are these children, you mentioned in Manitoba, so are they Inuit from Manitoba, or did they attend Manitoba residential schools?
They attended Manitoba residential
Okay.
schools, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of, sorry, the confines of which we have to work within, because we are the Manitoba Inuit Association. We do look towards like Northern Ontario and Saskatchewan for our research, because through our research we found that a lot of the children that were not able to get sent home in time because of the ice not being broken through, they were just sent to neighboring residential schools, which very
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, other questions, comments? Oh, Sandra, please. And then I saw somebody at the back briefly stand up. Yeah, we'll get to you after.
Thanks, Joe. I see Tom over there and I see Deborah over there. I didn't see you stand up when I asked the working group to stand up. But I just want to acknowledge the work that you both do, which helps us going. We have such a strong working group in the history, as well as the ground search. What else? I don't remember all the technical names, and I'm a senior. I have senior moments, so anyway. All three of you, please stand up. Desiree as well. This work can only be successful when we make connections and network with other people who are good at what they do. So I just wanted to acknowledge you guys, since you're so humble. It's excellent work that you do. Thank you.
Okay, one at the back there.
I just wanted to acknowledge the speakers that came up there for enlightening me. I thank my mother for inviting me here today. It was a pretty emotional day. Thank you, Desiree, for all the work that you've done. You know, I know I'm not as old as everyone here. I'm 55 now. I get worried about my nephew and my nieces. I wonder how they're going to be helped. Who's going to help them? Hey? They don't want to listen to the older ones. Like me, I never listen to my uncles when they talk to me. I listen to my friends. Okay? The ones that are close to my age. It's good to see someone young take it, grab it, grab our hurt and our pain. Okay? Myself too, reason why it's so touching to me, I've lived a rough life. It's no lie. But coming here today, all the hugs I got today, I thank you all for the hugs today. Made me feel good. Excuse me, I try not to cry, but I love you all. All of you that went to residential school. I hear the stories a lot. I work with my mom a lot, talk with my mom a lot. For somebody that's been through the justice system, for somebody that's been through the systemic racism, I feel so good. I feel so empowered. Empowered to see somebody that's so young take a hand. And not only did you reach out, but now after you've helped yourself, now you're helping us, just like the things there. How do we heal a nation? We got to start with ourselves first. Okay? But I just want to thank you all. Everybody that got up there and spoke today, everybody that got up there and presented, everybody that has traveled to here today, I thank you all for enlightening me. And wow, I didn't expect this to be the day. You know, I just want to thank you all. Chief.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a fantastic note to wrap up this panel on. Thank you very much, Masicho Hai. And I will pass it back over to the MCs, Shirley and Joe.
Thank you, Crystal. Masicho. Oh, that was great, eh? It just been a long day. Yeah, it has been a long day. I'm not that old, but I'm tired. Just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for all your questions and engaging in the panel. It's really important for us to get your feedback and your questions. Thank you so much to all the presenters. Just amazing. So this brings us to the end of our day. Joe? Yes. He's leaving me by myself to do this by myself. It's Jay. Thank you all for being here today. We really, really appreciate it. Before I give further information, I'd like to really call up now just to close this part of our day, but I want to tell you a bit more about what's happening tonight. But for now and for this part of the program, I'd like to call upon our elder, Bessie Jackson again. Bessie, my friend from many places, will you please come up here and say closing prayer? They confused the First Nations. Betsy was from many places, but she is from Ta'an. She's an elder from Ta'an, and she's going to bless us with the closing prayer for today.
So thank you very much for the closing prayer, Betsy. Just for your information, the potlatch or feast will start at 6 o'clock. Afterwards, we're going to have some Old Crow dancers performing for you. For the people that may not come this evening, don't forget, don't come back here tomorrow. Gold Rush, okay? Gold Rush. Unfortunately, they booked this place way back in time, and they could only book it for one day. But something changed, but they couldn't get out of the contract with Gold Rush. So we are having it at Gold Rush tomorrow. So take care, everyone. God bless, and we'll see you tonight.